Okay, so we're all aware it's probably gonna get loud at various points in here from what they're doing outside, so we're just gonna try to bear with it as much as possible, right? So the reading assignment for next time is a little bit more logistically complicated than usual because we're switching to a different book, right? So these two things that I want you to read, the Proclamation of the Irish Republic and the brief excerpt from Matthew Arnold, these are in Volume E, so these are in the Victorian book. The Yeats poems that I want you to read for next time are in Volume F. So next time you will need to bring both books, right? This should be the only time over the course of the semester that you actually need to bring two books with you. Response paper 7 is due on Friday. Does anybody have any questions about any upcoming assignments or anything else? Yes, Valencia.
When are the projects due for the presentation?
The dates for those are on the assignment sheet.
Okay.
So yeah, it depends on what you're presenting on. Yeah, Alex.
Is the assignment sheet posted on Georgia View?
I don't know if it is. I'll check and make sure that it is. I know that I emailed it to everybody and I gave everyone a physical copy. But yeah, I will make sure that it is posted to Georgia View as well, so it's easily accessible. I will also give everybody the assignment for paper 2 next week, so that you all have plenty of time to work on it. Does anybody have any other questions about upcoming assignments or things that might cut through the noise slightly for a minute or two? No? Okay. Then let's talk about Christina Rossetti. What did you guys think of this poem? How did this go for you?
It was weird.
Okay. What was weird about it? What do you mean by weird?
Because, well, first of all, first the language, but that's neither here nor there. But it was like parts of the story I would get it, okay, she's going to get fruit from somewhere she shouldn't be, and she knows she shouldn't.
Uh-huh.
But then it was like, I couldn't understand, like, after she ate the fruit, like, when she got back to the house, I would get lost in that part because I didn't understand it.
Okay, so it lost you after Laura ate the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Was that true for the rest of you too? Was anybody else able to make sense of what's happening after that part? Alex, what happens then after Laura eats the fruit?
She basically becomes like obsessed with it, and then she becomes like sick later on,
Mm-hmm.
and she has to have the fruit to like cure her sickness.
Yeah, so the lack of the fruit, right, not having the fruit, makes her kind of wither away, right? But can she get more of it herself? Yeah, the goblins don't appear to her anymore, right? Her sister, who has not yet tasted the fruit, can still hear the goblins, right? But Laura can't anymore. And so then how does Lizzie rescue her sister?
She goes and let them, well, at first she was going to buy some from them, but
Uh-huh.
she didn't.
Yeah.
And so they got upset and they tried to make her eat it.
Yeah.
And so they squeezed the juice on her and she went and gave it to her sister.
Yes. And this both revives Laura and gives, like, essentially destroys her taste for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's the situation that both of them are in at the end of the poem?
They're telling their kids about it.
Yeah, they're both wives with children telling their children about this experience, right? And, telling them to embrace, the idea of sisterhood and things like that, right? So that's the basic plot of the poem, right? Now, why do you think the goblins stop appearing to Laura after she's tasted the fruit?
Was it because she gave them her hair?
Yeah, we'll sit on that for a minute. Yeah, that's what she pays them with, right? She pays them with a lock of hair. and she sits and eats with them, right? What does Lizzie try to pay them with?
Okay.
Yeah, Lizzie tries to pay them with a penny. And what does she refuse to do?
Sit with them.
Yeah, she will not sit with them. Right, so we'll go to these moments in the poem in a minute, right? These are important, right? But I think we also need to think about here why, after buying the fruit, Laura is barred from the goblin presence, right? Why do they not appear to her anymore while they still appear to her sister?
Was it because she tried to plant the pig?
Well, she tries to plant the seed out of desperation, right? Because they're not appearing to her anymore. So, I think we can actually find the answer in the first couple lines of the poem here, right? Page 542. Can somebody just read for me the first two lines of the poem?
Morning and evening, maids heard goblins cry.
Okay, who hears the goblins cry?
Maids.
Maids. And what does maids mean in this context? Think of it not in terms of domestic worker, but in terms of sort of station in life.
Like symbol or like a name.
Yeah, think in terms of like maidens, right? So, young virgin women, right? So, what might that have to do with the fact that Laura doesn't see the goblins anymore or hear them anymore after she's tasted the fruit?
Because she gets old.
Well, yeah, but that is kind of a consequence a little bit later, right? Think about this in terms of what the fruit might represent. Try to think of this in symbolic terms, right? Why does Laura no longer hear the goblin cry? I think it might also help if we think about who are the only male characters in the poem? The goblins are the only male figures in the poem, right? Yeah. Even when Laura and Lizzie are wives at the end, right? They are, there's no mention of their husbands, right? The husbands appear to be absent, and all of their children seem to be girls. So, I think that that what's going on here becomes clear if we think about it in terms of some of those tropes we talked about last time, right? What were those two notions of Victorian middle-class womanhood that we discussed last time? Does anybody remember? Okay, yeah, the fallen woman. And what was her opposite? Yeah, the angel in the house, right? And how are these two defined? What characteristics define the angel in the house?
The woman who tries to fix the corruption will make sure that her husband is not corrupted by everything on the outside.
Yeah, so she's a sort of moral anchor for her husband and family, right? Right, based on the notion that women are innately simple and good. What else can we say about the angel in the house? What is the thing that most distinguishes her from the fallen woman?
She takes care of people in the house.
Yeah, she takes care of her husband and her family, right? How does the fallen woman fall?
Being unfaithful to her husband or something?
Yeah, some sort of lapse in chastity, right? Some kind of sexual impropriety. Which leads her to be cast out of society, right? So the angel in the house is a moral anchor for the husband and family, is on the one hand constantly giving, right? Right. She lives not for herself but for others. And is also a paragon of stainless virtue, right? That is stainless chastity. Whatever her husband does, she is completely faithful to him, right? Now, it should also be noted again that the extent to which either of these extremes actually existed is debatable, right? But they're popular tropes in literature and art in the period, and they're highly culturally influential, right? So whether or not people actually fit either of these stereotypes, one was an ideal that people genuinely did try to live up to, and the other was it's kind of dark fate they tried to avoid, right? Because the fallen woman, due to her sexual impropriety, is what? How does society treat her? Sorry?
Not trash.
Yeah, she's ostracized, right? She's basically kicked out. Having sacrificed her respectability, she is no longer welcome in quote-unquote decent society, right? So it might help if we try to map the two sisters in this poem onto these two literary tropes and then see what the poem does with them, right? If we look at their behavior as they are first watching the goblins, bottom of page 542, can I get somebody to start reading from Evening by Evening Among the Brookside Rushes?
Evening by evening among the brookside rushes, Laura bowed her head to hear. Lizzie veiled her blushes, crouching close together in the cooler weather with clasping arms and cautioning lips. With tingling cheeks and fingertips lie close, Laura said. Keep reading?
Keep reading, yep.
Okay. Prickling up her golden head, we must not look at goblin men, we must not buy their fruits. Who knows upon what soil they feed their hungry, thirsty roots? Come by, called the goblins, hobbling down the glen. Oh, cried Lizzie, Laura, Laura, you should not keep at goblin men. Lizzie covered up her eyes, covered close lest they should look. Laura prepared. Laura reared her glossy head and whispered like the restless brook.
Okay, you can stop there, right? So we can see a difference here in the way the two sisters respond to the goblins, right? Which of the two seems more interested in the goblins?
Laura, yeah.
Yeah, Laura is listening to and hearkening to the goblins' calls, right? She's curious. What about Lizzie? What's Lizzie doing when she hears and sees the goblins?
She turns away,
Yeah, she literally is covering her eyes and closing up her ears, right? Hear no evil, see no evil, right? So, Laura is tempted. Lizzie avoids temptation, right? Avoids temptation largely kind of through blinding herself to it, right? Like, nope, 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 not gonna look, not gonna look. Not gonna engage. So, already, like, how can we see, like, how can we see these divergent paths that the sisters are on in terms of this binary?
Lizzie would be the angel in the house and the word would be the woman.
Yeah. In fact, if we look at what happens when Laura goes to eat with the goblins, right? on page 544. Can I get somebody to read, starting in line 115, but sweet tooth Laura spoke in haste? Somebody who has not read yet.
But sweet tooth Lord spoke in haste, good folk, I have no coin to take word to purloin. I have no copper in my purse, I have no silver either, and all my gold is on the furs. That shakes in winter weather above the rusty heather. Heather, you have had much gold upon your head. They answer all together, buy from us with the golden curl.
Okay, you can stop there, right? So we already mentioned this, right? That she pays with a lock of her hair rather than with money, right? Why is this significant? What is she using as her purchasing power here? And it might help, again, if we think about this in terms of other texts we've read involving women and market values of various kinds.
I guess she's using her beauty, I could say?
Yes, exactly. She's buying the fruit with her beauty, right? Now, where have we seen this kind of thing before?
Wasn't
With Wednesday and what's the name?
Exactly, yeah. Essentially, Bertha's economic value in the marriage market, right, is based entirely on her beauty. Her power over whimsy comes from her beauty, right? And once her beauty fades, all that power is gone, all that value is gone, right? So yeah. So her value to the goblins lies in her beauty. But are the goblins looking to establish any kind of permanent relationship with her?
no.
Absolutely not, right? This is a one and done kind of situation. And indeed, if we look a little further here, right, after she buys the fruit with a golden curl, right? She clipped a precious golden lock, she dropped a tear more rare than pearl, then sucked their fruit globes fairer red, sweeter than honey from the rock. Stronger than man-rejoicing wine, clearer than water flowed that juice. She never tasted such before, how should it cloy with length of use? She sucked and sucked and sucked the more, fruits which that unknown orchard bore. She sucked until her lips were sore, then flung the empty rinds away, but gathered up one kernel stone, and knew not was it night or day, as she turned home alone. So, does anything that strikes you as weird about the way she consumes this fruit? What's strange about this?
Like she's an animal, I guess, maybe? Kind of?
Yeah, it's almost beast-like, right? And the way it's described is almost in terms of like sexual ecstasy as well, right? That there's more to this than simply eating fruit, right? That the goblins want her to sit with them and feast with them. And it ends up sounding almost kind of like an orgy, right? Which is especially weird considering that the language and the meter in the poem are very kind of childlike and sing-song, right? So there is this kind of tension between innocence and experience. Even in the way the poem is, like even the way the poem is assembled, right? And Laura has sacrificed that innocence now to the goblins. Now, I think it's also important to note what happens when she tries to plant that kernel stone on page 548, right? One day, remembering her kernel stone, right, the last little bit of the fruit she got from the goblins, she set it by a wall that faced the south, dewed it with tears, hoped for a root, watched for a waxing shoot, but there came none. It never saw the sun, it never felt the trickling moisture run, while with sunk eyes and faded mouth she dreamed of melons as a traveler sees, false waves and desert drought, with shade of leaf-crowned trees, and burns the thirstier in the sandful breeze. What's supposed to happen when you plant seed? Yeah. You water it, you take care of it, it grows, right? Why does it matter that this seed doesn't grow, especially in light of the way we've just discussed Laura's experience with the goblins?
You saying like the seed from the fruit that she ate?
Yeah.
It's probably because it's magical and only the goblins can grow it.
Okay, like on the literal level of the story, right? And indeed, like one of the things that's weird about these fruits, we'll talk about that in a minute, is like where do they come from, right? Where do the goblins get these fruits? But think about this in terms of this fallen woman idea and the whole innocence versus experience thing, right? What else might that kernel stone represent? Pardon? Explain.
Well, now that she lost her innocence, she can't grow the seed, or the seed will grow.
Okay, yeah, that innocence won't come back, right? But I think we can also sort of think about this in terms of like the eating with the goblins as a kind of metaphorical sex act, right? That it's ultimately one that's infertile, that does not produce offspring, right? Nothing grows out of this. And there is historical precedent for like that Lizzie is operating on in not wanting to take up the goblins on their offer, right? So who or what does Lizzie remember that keeps her away from the goblins?
Didn't she say something happened to someone in the past that was around her?
Yeah, if you look on page 545, right? Around line 147 here. Do you not remember Jeannie, how she met them in the moonlight, took their gifts both choice and many, ate their fruits and wore their flowers, plucked from bowers where summer ripens at all hours? But ever in the moonlight she pined and pined away, sought them by night and day, found them no more but dwindled and grew gray, then fell with the first snow, while to this day no grass will grow where she lies low. I planted daisies there a year ago that never blow. You should not loiter so. So Jeannie's death is also associated with a kind of cold and infertile grave, right? But what do we notice about Lizzie's behavior even towards this dead girl who fits the fallen woman stereotype? Yeah, like how would we expect the angel in the house to react to the fallen woman? How should, according to Victorian social ideals, an angel in the house react to a fallen woman? Yeah, keep away, right? You want to avoid that kind of moral stain, right? But we see here, like that not only has Lizzie not forgotten this other girl, poor Jeannie, right? But she has also tried in her way to take care of Jeannie after her death, right? She visits the grave. She tries to plant flowers there, right? She tries to, she cultivates Jeannie's memory. She doesn't cut her off or ostracize her, right? I guess, easy enough to do when somebody's dead, right? But this also kind of foreshadows another path forward here, right? That maybe it is not absolutely necessary for the fallen woman to be ostracized from society, right? Maybe the fact that someone is fallen does not mean that they are completely irredeemable. Does not mean they cannot be reintegrated into society. Okay, are you following me? Okay, sort of. Okay, where did I lose you?
How would she get gained back into society?
Okay, Jeannie can't, right? Because Jeannie's dead. But who can?
Oh,
Exactly, right? It's too late for Jean, although, Lizzie's tending of the grave does show kindness and empathy, right? But it's not too late for Laura. Now, why do you think the goblins accepted Laura's payment but do not accept Lizzie's? Pardon?
Because I think then wasn't Lizzie the one where I know she was like she was going to eat the fruit, but just not with them.
Well, and she's not going to eat it herself, right?
Yeah.
She's just trying to get it for Laura, and she's not going to eat with them.
Yeah.
What is she? And it's important too what she tries to pay them with, right? So her sister gave them a lock of hair. What does Lizzie try to give them?
She actually tries to give them money.
Yeah, she tries to pay with actual currency, right? Let us make an actual financial transaction here, right? I will give you money, you will give me fruit, and I will take it away. But that's not what the goblins want from her, right? The goblins want her to hang out and party with them. And that is what she refuses to do. And then what happens to the goblins?
Yeah.
Yeah, they get really pissed, right? And they become abusive. If we look on page 550, right? They began to scratch their pates, no longer wagging purring, but visibly demurring, grunting and snarling. One called her proud, cross-grained, uncivil. Their tones waxed loud, their looks were evil. Lashing their tails, they trod and hustled her, elbowed and jostled her, clawed with their nails, barking, mewing, hissing, mocking, tore her gown and soiled her stocking, twitched her hair out by the roots, stamped upon her tender feet, held her hands and squeezed their fruits against her mouth to make her eat.
So, I read that part, but was this her imagination or did this actually happen?
No, we are to take this as having actually happened in the world of the poem, right? Yeah, this is not something that she imagines. This is something that the goblins do to her, right? Yeah.
But it said, like, after all this, it said that she went back home. So how did they do all that and she still went back home?
Well, they don't kill her, right?
Yes, but they don't notice that she's all tore up. Or no?
Well, what do you mean they don't notice that she's all...
I mean, you just said they pushed her and
Yeah.
her hair out by the roots.
Uh-huh.
So no one knows. I don't remember them
Well,
saying that.
who's the only person who's going to see her when she gets home?
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, she lives with her sister, right? They live alone there on this little farm. We'll talk about that in a minute. But, yeah, what's important here is what happens when one, in this case, or in the previous case, we had something that looked almost like an orgy, right? The goblins and Laura just kind of riotously eating fruit together and kind of like rolling around in pleasure, right? Here we have something that ends up looking more like an assault, right? It's like, if you're not going to give us what we want, we're going to take it from you. So, they're not so nice anymore when they're refused the thing that they want. And even like the things that they say about her sound kind of like Victorian versions of the kinds of things that a guy says now when a girl turns them down, right? One called her proud, cross-grained, uncivil, right? Now, no one today would say that you're cross-grained or uncivil if you turn them down for a date, right? But they might do things like they'll call you a bitch or a snob, right? And that's the kind of thing that the goblins are doing here. Like acting as though they're kind of entitled to Lizzie's company if she wants the fruit from them. So it might also be important here to look back at what the goblins actually look like, right? So when you imagine a goblin, again, like without the context of the poem behind it, what do you typically think a goblin looks like? Yeah, ugly. What else?
A little green and a green.
Yeah, I was gonna say green. Yeah, sometimes they're green.
Yeah. A little green, hideous and ugly and frightening, right? Are these goblins obviously scary?
Yes, not if people are so tempted to look at them.
Yeah. Well, what do they look like?
A reptile?
Yeah, they say look like animals.
Yeah, they look like cute, furry little animals, right? You know, one of them looks kind of like a badger, one of them looks like a cat, one of them looks like a mouse. There's one that looks like a snail, one that looks like a parrot, right? So yeah, they look like animals.
Yeah, mysterious looking.
Yeah, but at the same time, like they're cute, right? They're just cute little guys carrying plates of fruit around. You know, they don't look threatening or hostile, right? And they only become hostile when they're denied what they want. And that's what happens to Lizzie, right? But it also then enables her to rescue her sister. For God's sake. All right, where was I?
Talking about the goblin.
Yes, okay. I'm so like every time I hear that drill, it just completely derails my train of thought. Okay, so we're talking about the goblins, right? We also know that the goblins are the only men in the poem, right? So what do we remember about the difference between like male and female spheres in Victorian society?
I would say a lot of people look up to the man or depend on the man.
Well, think more in terms of like where the two fit into society. Like, what do men do and what do women do? Like, what is a man's place in the Victorian world and what is a woman's place?
A man, he works and takes care of the family.
And where does he do his work? Outside, right? Yeah. Right? The man's domain in the Victorian worldview is the public realm, right? So politics and the market. Right? In the kind of like, not only in, like not in terms of like the shopping for stuff sense, but in terms of like the broader economy, right? And what is the woman's sphere of responsibilities? If the man lives in the public realm in the market, where does the woman live? Yes. She operates in the domestic sphere. And probably has servants, so she doesn't really have to do very much. But her work is in managing the household, right? So when Lizzie tries to purchase fruit from the goblins with money, she's operating in their sphere, or trying to operate in their sphere and not in hers, right? She's not operating in the realm of domestic economy there. She's operating in the market. And so the male goblins reject her overtures there, right? What they want is the thing they value her for, right? Her beauty. They want her hair and her company. Not the thing that they would exchange with each other. Now, I think it's also important to look at what the sisters do day by day on their farm, right? If we look at on page 546, can I get somebody to read, starting with early in the morning when the first cock crowed his warning?
Early in the morning when the first cock crowed this morning, beat like bees, as sweet and busy, Lord rose with Lizzie, fetched and honey, milked the cow, aired a set to right the house, kneaded cakes and of white as wheat, cakes for dainty mouths to eat, next church butter, whipped up cream, fed the poultry, sat and sold. Talked as modest maids should, Lizzie with an open heart, Lord with an absent dream, one content, one sick in part, One warbling for the mere bright days of light, one longing for the night.
Okay, thank you. So, what do they spend their days doing?
Working.
Yeah, they work they work the farm, right? Do they actually need to buy anything?
No.
Yeah, the farm produces everything they need, right? They got milk, they can make butter, they can bake cakes, they got chickens, right? They've got everything they need here. So they operate in a kind of self-sufficient little mini society, right?
So if they have all this stuff there, then why do they always be talking about how hungry they are?
Good question. Well, which one is hungry?
Yeah.
Right? Laura's the one who talks about her hunger, right?
Yeah.
Both before and after eating the goblin fruits. And neither, like we've established here by looking at the produce of their farm, right? They don't need the goblin fruits, right? They're fine as they are. So what is Laura then, kind of given the paradigm we're talking about here, actually hungry for?
I mean, if you saying they already got stuff there, I really don't get why she would be hungry, you know? You got food at the house. It's not like you don't grow the stuff. It's not like,
Yeah. But again, right, you know, the fruit is fruit and it isn't, right? So what Laura is, particularly compared to her sister, Laura is curious about sex, right? She's curious about the goblins.
she seems to be the only one attracted to them since Lizzie already knows.
Yeah, Lizzie stays away from them, right? Like, Lizzie doesn't allow herself to be tempted, right? She adopts a close my eyes policy until she can't anymore. But Laura is curious. And so, yeah, I think that like what's going on is that she's curious about men, and she's curious about things that are outside their little self-sufficient domestic sphere, right? And I think it's important to note here too, though, that like that Lizzie and Laura don't sit around knitting lace doilies all damn day, right? You know what they're doing here, what they're describing, is hard work. So they're not participating in the usual middle-class Victorian women's activities, you know, like drinking tea and, you know, snipping lace and whatever. You know, they are working a farm by themselves. The other thing that shows, though, is that, right, the farm works when the sisters work together as a unit, right? Now, if we look at exactly what the goblins are selling, right? And the reason I was playing these street sellers' cries at the beginning of class was to give you an example of like what the goblins' cries might have sounded like. Like the way you didn't go to a grocery store if you lived in Victorian England, right? What you did typically was buy food either in an open-air marketplace or from street sellers who would, you know, walk up and down the neighborhood carrying pails of milk or a basket of fruit or bread or whatever. You know, they would usually, in order to attract business, they would have to come up with catchy little songs, right? So they would sing songs to attract attention to themselves, so that you would, you know, either visit their stall or come down into the street and buy whatever they were selling, right? And that's where Rossetti is drawing the goblin's song from, is from the street sellers' cries, which typically also describe the goods being sold. If we look at the beginning here again, page 542, the goblin's cry here, right? Come buy our orchard fruits, come buy, come buy. Apples and quinces, lemons and oranges, plump unpecked cherries, melons and raspberries, bloom down-cheeked peaches, swart-headed mulberries, wild freeborn cranberries, crab apples, dewberries, pineapples, blackberries, apricots, strawberries, all ripe together in summer weather. Morns that pass by, fair eves that fly. Come buy, come buy. Our grapes fresh from the vine, pomegranates full and fine, dates and sharp bullaces, rare pears and greengages, damsons and bilberries, taste them and try, currants and gooseberries, bright firelight barberries, figs to fill your mouth, citrons from the south, sweet to tongue and sound to eye, come buy, come buy. So what does the Goblin's list of goods here have that Laura and Lizzie's farm really doesn't? Pardon?
They have like all different types of fruit all at the same time.
Yeah, variety, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, they probably don't grocery stores.
Yeah, so while Laura and Lizzie certainly produce enough for themselves to eat and to survive, right? They're probably eating more or less the same thing every day, right?
Right.
So what the Goblins are offering is variety here. And what else do we note about a lot of these fruits that the Goblins are selling? Do all of these fruits actually grow in England? No, I mean, yeah, pineapples, pomegranates, yeah, you can't grow those in cold countries like England, right?
Yeah, sound more tropical.
Yeah, a lot of these are tropical fruits, that to, an English person would be exotic, right? And even Laura herself questions where they come from on page 543, right? When she says, we must not look at goblin men, we must not buy their fruits. Who knows upon what soil they fed their hungry, thirsty roots? So, if we're thinking about this kind of larger theme of self-sufficiency here, we're also looking at a critique not just of Victorian sexual politics, but also of colonialist economics, right? Think of past conversations we've had about, say, tea and sugar, right? What do we remember from our past discussions about the sugar trade?
They had to be slaves.
Yeah, it was produced by pretty brutal slave labor in the West Indies, right? And sugar consumption was pervasive in England in the 18th and 19th centuries. It shot up exponentially. And because people liked their sugar, they turned a blind eye to where it was coming from, right? Now, what is the beverage that we most associate with England and with Englishness? And don't say beer.
Tea.
Tea, yes.
I wasn't even thinking beer. Like, don't say beer. I wasn't even thinking that. I was thinking more what you said.
Okay, good. I'm glad. So the warning was unnecessary. So where does tea come from?
Did you say Britain? What you say?
Well, that's the thing, is it doesn't, right? We associate it with Britain, with British culture, because the British are huge tea drinkers. But you can't grow tea trees in Britain. The climate's not right for it.
Did you say it came from Indians?
Yeah, it comes from India, China, and Africa, right? So tea, this most English beverage, is not English at all. And, prior to opening up trade with India, no one in England would have ever drunk it, right? Similar to how, when you think about Italian food, right? Like, what's the thing you tend to associate most with Italian food?
Pasta.
Pasta, yeah. Before the 13th century, no one in Italy had ever eaten a noodle. Noodles are Chinese. They made them with rice flour, and then Marco Polo brings back the recipe to Italy from his travels in China, and they use wheat flour instead because wheat was more readily available. noodles are Chinese. So the point here being, right, is that instead of being happy with what they can produce on their own, the sisters are becoming interested in these fruits that are being produced under unknown circumstances far away, right? And I think that there is, I haven't developed this idea too far yet, but I think there is a critique in here of those same kinds of practices we saw people like Clarkson and Coleridge talking about in the sugar trade, right? That you don't ask questions about where your sugar comes from because you know, and you just don't want to deal with that, right? I think there's a similar thing going on here with the goblin fruits. But let's go here to the end of the poem. When Lizzie comes to rescue Laura. If we look on page 553, life out of death. That night long, Lizzie watched by her, counted her pulses' flagging stir, felt for her breath, held water to her lips and cooled her face with tears and fanning leaves. But when the first birds chirped about their eaves, and early reapers plodded to the place of golden sheaves, and dew-wet grass bowed in the morning wind so brisk to pass, and new buds with new day opened of cup-like lilies on the stream, Laura awoke as from a dream, laughed in the innocent old way, hugged Lizzie but not twice or thrice. Her gleaming locks showed not one thread of gray, her breath was sweet as May, and light danced in her eyes. So, not only has Lizzie risked herself, her body, and her virtue to rescue her sister, right? What is she doing as her sister recovers?
Taking care of her.
Yeah. She's nursing her back to health, right? She's watching her to make sure that she revives, right? She's caring for her rather than abandoning her. And that gets back to this angel in the house, fallen woman dichotomy, right? I think that in a lot of ways what the poem is arguing for is for women not to ostracize each other based on perceived respectability or lack thereof, right? But instead to help each other out, right? If one woman sees another in trouble, what she should do is not avoid her to avoid moral pollution, right? But instead, do what she can to lift her up and bring her back into society. Because again, remember that the farm works best as a unit, right? When the two sisters are working together, hand in hand. And I think that's reinforced by the way the poem ends. Right? Days, weeks, months, years afterwards, when both were wives with children of their own, right? Married to whom? We don't know. It doesn't say because it's not important, right? It doesn't matter who their husbands are. What matters is the sisters' relationship. Their mother hearts beset with fears, their lives bound up in tender lives. Laura would call the little ones and tell them of her early prime, those pleasant days long gone of not returning time. Would talk about the haunted glen, the wicked, quaint fruit merchant men, their fruits like honey to the throat, but poison in the blood. Men sell not such in any town. Would tell them how her sister stood in deadly peril to do her good, and win the fiery antidote. Then joining hands to little hands would bid them cling together, for there is no friend like a sister in calm or stormy weather, to cheer one on the tedious way, to fetch one if one goes astray, to lift one if one totters down, to strengthen whilst one stands. And I know that personally, I tend to be averse to simplistic moral readings of any of the kinds of texts that we're looking at, right? I don't think there is like one single moral message to extract from any text. But this text seems to be demanding that we do extract some kind of moral from it. But I think that the moral that it is trying to teach is actually relatively complex, right? And offers a critique of a social stereotype, right? A kind of corrective to this idea that pits women against each other based on perceived virtue. There was one more thing that I wanted to say about this, and now I can't remember it because the damn drill has driven just about all thoughts out of my head. Do you guys have any questions about this? Yeah, Kyla.
On the line above the one that you just read, I think it was 500 to 520. I got lost in that part. I didn't really get what was going on between those lines.
Okay, 500 to 520. Okay, so what happens here, right? I think we probably need to start a little earlier there to figure out what's going on here. If we look on, if we start maybe around line 464, when Lizzie first comes home, right? She cried, "Laura, up the garden, did you miss me? Come and kiss me. Never mind my bruises. Hug me, kiss me, suck my juices, squeezed from goblin fruits for you. Goblin pulp and goblin dew. Eat me, drink me, love me. Laura, make much of me. For your sake I have braved the glen and had to do with goblin merchantmen." So she comes home covered in the juices from the fruits and tells her sister to essentially eat the fruits off of her body, right? Laura started from her chair, flung her arms up in the air, clutched her hair. "Lizzie, Lizzie, have you tasted, for my sake, the fruit forbidden? Must your light like mine be hidden, your young life like mine be wasted, undone in mine undoing, and ruined in my ruin, thirsty, cankered, goblin-ridden?" She clung about her sister, kissed and kissed and kissed her. Tears once again refreshed her shrunken eyes, dropping like rain after long sultry drought. Shaking with aguish fear and pain, she kissed and kissed her with a hungry mouth. Her lips began to scorch. The juice was wormwood to her tongue. She loathed the feast. Writhing as one possessed, she leaped and sung, rent all her robe and wrung her hands in lamentable haste and beat her breast. Her locks streamed like the torch borne by a racer at full speed, or like the mane of horses in their flight, or like an eagle when she stems the light straight toward the sun, or a caged thing freed, or like a flying flag when armies run. So what's happening here, right? She finally gets the fruit that she has been craving, right? And then how does her body respond to it?
It makes her even more sick.
Yeah, basically rejects it, right? The taste is loathsome to her, right? And it makes it essentially kind of like makes her go crazy for a moment, right? Swift fire spread through her veins, knocked in her heart, met the fiery smoldering there and overbore its lesser flame. She gorged on bitterness without a name. Ah, fool, to choose such part of soul-consuming care. Sense failed in the moral strife like the watchtower of a town, which an earthquake shatters down, like a lightning-stricken mast, like a wind-uprooted tree, spun about like a foam-topped waterspout. Cast down headlong in the sea, she fell at last. Pleasure past and anguish past, is it death or is it life? So she falls unconscious from the effects of the fruit, right? And this passage is one that actually does kind of get talked about a lot, and it was one that I was intending to focus on for a minute if the damn drilling had not basically made me forget everything I intended to do today, repeatedly. You can tell how I feel about this, right? So, what, particularly from the standpoint of Victorian morality, seems strange about this passage? Particularly about the way Lizzie is curing her sister.
What do you mean, like the things she says or like the things she does?
Yeah, and the way Laura the way Laura responds to Lizzie's request, eat me, drink me, love me, right? Like, much like the feasting with the goblins, this is often read as having very strong sexual overtones, right? And on the one hand, you've got the sister using basically the same process to cure her sister. But on the other hand, you have like the other sister's body completely, rejecting it before she's cured, right? So there's a kind of complex sexual negotiation going on here that I've never really been quite sure what to make of. But it does ultimately seem to reinforce the notion that the most important relationship is the sisterhood relationship in the world of the poem, the way it's constructed, right? That what matters most here is that Lizzie went and braved the goblins for her sister's sake, put up with their violence, put up with their verbal abuse, came back with the fruit, and then took care of Laura while she came back from the brink, right? That's kind of like what's, in a lot of ways, really the essence of the poem here. And it's all done in very childlike and sing-song language, right? So what kind of story does this resemble? If we have to think just like in terms of genre, right? Think about the kinds of stories that feature characters like goblins and magic fruits.
I would say a fairy tale, but...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what this is. It's a fairy tale in verse, right? And fairy tales were enormously popular in the early 1860s. You had English translations of The 1001 Nights. You had Grimm's fairy tales being translated into English. And you also had the French fairy tales of Charles Perrault appearing in English. Things like Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty, right? Now, what changes is who these stories are intended for. Who do we tend to think of fairy tales as being for? We tend to think of them as being for children, right? But prior to about the mid-19th century in Europe, in the public imagination, was there really any such thing as a child? We've already kind of discussed this, right? That not really, right? Children, no matter what their social class, were regarded as mini adults in training, right? And then by the mid-19th century, middle class and upper class children begin to be treated as a separate category, right? So we have in this period the emergence of childhood as a separate category of development or experience, right? And these fairy tales, which were originally intended for adults and were often based on oral folk tales, become the literature of Victorian childhood. And it's hard to say whether Rossetti's poem was intended for children or not. On the one hand, as we noted, the language is kind of simple and the meter is pretty sing-song, right? So it's a poem that the average Victorian child, for whom some of those archaic words that threw you guys wouldn't be a problem, would be able to understand, at least on the level of plot, right? But there is also a lot of potentially difficult content in here, right? That reflect kind of that uneasy negotiation in Victorian society between childhood and adulthood, right? What it means to be a child versus what it means to be an adult. I think that some of what we're seeing in this text is the initiation of these two girls into a kind of adulthood, right? But they're trying, through Lizzie's efforts in particular, to be better kind of adults than the examples that are in front of them, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's about all I have on this. Do you guys have any other questions? Anything else that confused you or that you would like to know more about? All right, then I will let you go there. Remember, like, the Yeats poems in Volume F, I really only want you guys to focus on these 4, right? So make sure that you've read these 4 poems, plus the Proclamation of an Irish Republic and the Matthew Arnold piece in Volume E. All right, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Yes, Alex?
Can I take a picture of that?
Yeah, go ahead.